So, Grant, what do we know about the gimbal footage? I've seen two different videos now. We got the Tic Tac UFO, which is lower quality, both gun camera FLIR footage, and we got the gimbal footage, which is the one that spins. It seems like a lot of people seem to get these two videos mixed up and intertwined. It seems to me that there's more evidence that supports the Tic Tac UFO, where we've got it on three different sensory systems, you know, multiple aircraft and ships all tracking it on radar. But the gimbal footage is just the two younger guys, you know, watching this thing fly, you know, through the wind. What all do we know about the origin of the gimbal footage?
That's almost like a whole show. This film, there's some problems with the film, and I pointed this out. And no matter what people want to say, there is problems with the film. When they get the Tic Tac thing, and I just discovered this today, the image that they use of the Tic Tac in the October the 11th thing is not from any of these events. It's taken from some UFO sighting in England. This white, looks like a Tic Tac thing on the screen that they showed on the October 11th thing. That had nothing to do with Nimitz or, and I don't think this is gun camera stuff. It's not gun camera footage. It's from these type of screens that they use. So you have the two. The one has been around. The one with the three different objects, where one is a Dale-like thing, not the one that had the voice. The other one, that one's been around since 2007. It was, and this is where we're looking at this right now. It was on a German board of people who did science fiction creations or something like this. So, and it was the film. It was on there, and it's still in the archives. And a lot of people have discussed this, that this film has been around. And then you have the one with the audio, and that one has problems. And if you actually listen, and I can maybe even take over the screen and play you the two different audios to show you the fact what the problem was with the sound. Now John Lear brings it out. And people start attacking John Lear because he believes there's, the aliens are going to steal your soul and stuff like that. And I say you got to distinguish between people who have crazy ideas and whether they're telling the truth. John Lear has some crazy ideas, but John Lear is making very legitimate points about this video that it has some problems. It's moving at a very slow speed. Let's go to this video. So I'll play you the two sounds here.
And John Lear's, he's been a fighter test pilot, works for the CIA. He has good insight into this, right? Yeah, and
he likes conspiracy stuff, but he had 120 air certificates. He flew for the CIA. His father was the guy that invented Learjet. He lost his job over UFOs. He was fired as an airline pilot when they found out that he was into UFOs and stuff like that. And he's the guy, whatever people want to say, if it were not for John Lear, the stealth fighter story would not have been broken. It was broken by KLS TV in Las Vegas because of John Lear. And they admit, yes. And the Area 51 story would not have been broken without John Lear, because it was John Lear. And I actually have a video on my YouTube channel, White House UFO YouTube channel, where I talk about Area 51 and I tell the story. And when I put out the books, I put out a couple of books that have the Area 51 story in it. And in there, I basically described the role of John Lear. And he had a very key role in this whole thing, that he was the guy that brought in Bob Lazar to KLS TV. Then they ran the backlit thing, and they went from there. And George then picked up 24 other sources that confirmed all the stuff that Bob Lazar was saying. But it was actually John Lear that got this whole thing started. So John, despite all the crazy things he may believe, I believe is an honest guy. He will tell you exactly what he thinks, even if it's crazy stuff. And so here, I'll play you the video. This is the New York Times video, and you can listen to the sound. And what he talks about is this sound in the background. And he talks about the fact that pilots don't talk that way. And he talks about, they're talking about the wind. And he talks about, in the interview I do with him, which is on my YouTube channel, he talks about the fact that you don't identify wind coming, moving 120 knots from the west. You talk on a 360-degree compass setting. So I'm going to play you first the New York Times video, and you can hear in the background, you'll hear this sound that goes through the whole thing as if they've got their mics open the whole time. And then I'm going to play some F-18 chatter from an actual F-18 talking to the ground, and where they actually talk about the weather. And you can listen to how they talk about weather in this video and how they talk about the weather in this this other chatter that's coming from the Thunderbirds, I believe it was.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude.
So you hear that noise in the background. Now here's actual, and you can find lots of this F-18 chatter on the internet. Here's one where the ground is talking to the pilots, and where they actually talk about weather. And you can hear how the mics are cutting off and on. There's not this constant noise in the background.
Tower 2-8, Sunny, final gear down, 6 left.
T-Bird 8, Dayton Tower, runway 6 left, clear to land, runway 6 left, RVR, greater than 6,000.
Go land 6 left, T-Bird 8, copy that.
Here comes the wind.
Wind 350 at 13, gust 21.
T-Bird 8.
And so that's what I'm saying. Despite what people want to say about John Lear being old or not having flown planes for a number of years or whatever, there is some problems with this video. But it really doesn't change things, as I say. In the one update I said, it really doesn't change things because this is how I believe they actually do it. So one of the potential things is that the video is real and the audio has been added. So this is what I say they did with MJ-12. This is what I say they did with a lot of stuff. Is what you do is when you want to put something out into the public, you alter it. So when you alter the thing, then when it comes out, it's a hoax. But it is the actual thing. You've just altered it a little bit. You've changed a word in the document, and that's always going to be the problem. So you have this situation where you're trying to get it across, and you got to put yourself in the government's position. You're trying to get this thing across. How do we confirm to the public that this is for real? You're always going to have the issue that at some point you're going to have to say, this thing's for real. You're going to have to say, here's a document that says it's for real. Here's a video that says it's for real. Here's metal that's actually, we believe is extraterrestrial. And when you make that move across that line, whether it's audio or video or metal or documents, you're going to go from gradual disclosure to disclosure. You're going to confirm it. And that's what you see. And the problem with this thing is, when this thing first broke on December 16th, I had contacted a number of reporters I knew. One agreed, went to his editor, said, okay, we'll play the game. I said, we should file for an FOIA. They're going to they have all these videos, they have all these documents, let's file for an FOIA. Get in line, because this is how it works. Get in line fast, let's file for the FOIA. So they file. On day one, when this was filed, a spokesman at the Department of Defense said, we did not release anything. And this is now becoming public. So you have this problem with the video. You have this problem that the Department of Defense is saying, we did not release this video. They are also saying, we did not release any documents. So now you have problems with the documents. We know that Bigelow has these documents, but you have this thing that the government can't make this position. They can't come across and say, yes, we spent $22 million. They're basically denying the whole thing. We're back to square one where it's, and so that's what Eric Davis says. When I ask him about what they call the COC, the chain of custody. This is the critical document. This actually says this came from the Defense Department. This is like the President of the United States signing his name and saying, yes, this is a legitimate document. So the question I ask Eric Davis is, where's the COC? Where's the chain of custody, which will prove that this is a real document? And that's when he said, it's there, but it's classified. So we can't release it for whatever reasons, you know, justifiable reasons or whatever. And that puts you back in the position that this is gradual disclosure. This is a document that's come out, and you're supposed to take it at face value that there is a COC somewhere in the background, but it's classified because it's going to tell the Russians what kind of equipment we're able to use on planes, what we're able to pick up and stuff like that. So we can't release it, so you have to take our faith, which to me is almost like the dog ate my homework type thing, where you really, they haven't made that move across the line. So it's exactly the same thing they've been doing for 20 years or 30 years or 50 years or 70 years. They're doing this gradual disclosure where they're telling the story and they're fictionalizing the story. They're sort of giving you this thing, but there's no absolute proof that it's actually real. And it's all starting to fall apart in terms of actual, you know, chain of custody as to this material.
would that be why you think they might have got rid of the audio in the gimbal footage, because they're trying to cover up actual voices of pilots that classified?
Yeah, but again, you got to remember that's been floating around for years, and I showed it a couple days. I did a webinar a couple days after the day of, maybe the day of or day after October 11th. I showed that video on there because I knew this thing had existed, and Giuliano, a friend of mine in Europe, helped me find this thing, and this is the one that was on the German board. So that may be legitimate film, or it still may be altered, but it's always this thing of how do you prove that it's actually a government film? And by putting that audio in there, I can see the point. It may be a legitimate film, the audio may be real, but it raises these questions. And every time they've done this, whether it's Bill Moore, whether it's Chase Brandon, whatever it is, it always has this sort of thing where they put it out and then they pull it back. So it's almost like the trap door. It's almost like that's why they use Tom DeLonge. Like Tom DeLonge is kind of not the character you'd want to use. If you want this thing out, you go to the president. You don't use a rock star who's got all sorts of like crazy lyrics that he sang on songs and stuff he's put out. And he had a conspiracy website in 2012 where he's putting conspiracy stuff. And he actually admitted he didn't believe half the stuff that was on there. And you don't use that kind of guy. That's the type of operation where you give it to people, as I described, the Messiah, and then you have the trap door. So you have whether it's Bob Lazar, who's missing his 2 degrees, or whether you have Tom DeLonge, who has all this weird background, or Dan Smith, who's just is like people thinks he's a twit bird. He just doesn't make any sense. He's talking in poetry. He's an eschatologist, the end of the world, and all this kind of stuff. And you hand it to these people because when the story comes out, you want the story to be pulled back, because you want this gradual disclosure. You want it to sort of come out. You don't want it to come out fully, because if you want it to come out fully, you tell the president, and the president has a news conference. So they're not disclosing and they're not covering up. The United States of America, as I point out many times, is the only place this is going on. It doesn't happen in Canada, doesn't happen in Europe. You don't have these people leaking videos, people doing this kind of stuff. This is the only place it happens. And I believe this is just another example of gradual disclosure. And I believe they've been doing the same thing over and over again for 70 years.
One other thing I forgot to ask. Maybe it was 2 weeks ago, shortly after this came out, I think it was around the 20th, this was on CBC News with Mrs. Tremonte, and she was talking to Nick Pope and Chef Shostak.
Yeah.
And, she actually sent a letter to the Canadian government asking about UFOs, and they sent back a letter to her saying, pretty much we can't confirm or deny this, is a bunch of bullshit. And then they said on the back of the letterhead, there's a funny picture of a UFO and an alien pretty much laughing the whole thing up. Did you hear about that?
No, I didn't hear about that. I'm going to check that out. That's pretty interesting, because the Canadian government hasn't really been involved since '54. And that's where I tell people, this is significant, because I say, you got to realize it only happens in the United States of America. So people always ask me, because I've done the U.S. presidents for years, and people, because when I'm in the States, they say, so what's going on in Canada? And the answer is always the same. I haven't got the foggiest notion. I don't even know if they're interested. I have no idea. They've not said anything since 1954. And that's what I'm saying. If you want this story to go away, you do what the Canadian government did. You just shut up and quit talking about it. And then you get someone like me who spent my entire life, and you say, well, what's with UFOs? Well, maybe there are no UFOs, because it doesn't appear the government's even interested in it. Whereas in the United States, there's all this great interest. So it's kind of interesting that she would get any sort of reaction. Usually the government just says, we really don't know. They'll give you the official line. We shut down this program in 1954. It was determined, no threat to national security. We're not withholding anything, and we haven't found no evidence of ET. And that's basically always the government position. Whereas in the States, you have these people leaking stuff, and you have, these high-level officials coming forward and claiming that this is for real. And, you got the president of the United States, Barack Obama's talking about it, and he's going on TV and reading off scripts with little 60-year-old kids about UFOs and stuff like that. And you go like, something's going on here. I mean, they're doing something here that's not being done in any other country.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, because I don't think, a country like Canada would be just completely ignoring it if they knew that other countries were somewhat interested. They got to have some sort, because we know now that the RCMP have went to investigate, and that all the RCMP reports go to other agencies like NUFORC or MUFON, so
Yeah, I mean, I had cases. I mean, I had the one particular case of an alien encounter in 1972 or 3 or whatever, and I talked to that witness at great length, and he reported to the RCMP, and they showed up, and they did this investigation of where the being was and where the craft was, and the markings on the ground and all this kind of stuff, and that report never showed up. So yeah, you can see this interest, but the whole thing is, there's nobody coming out and actually talking about it. Whereas you had brought up before, and so we can maybe get into this, is that suddenly WikiLeaks gets into this thing. And WikiLeaks puts out this thing about the fact that this is a major hoax, and, the Scientologists are behind this and stuff. And it's this implication that Hal Puthoff and, Leslie Kean and all these people are doing the Scientology scam to raise money. And the key thing is that the statement that was put out by WikiLeaks is Ron Pandolfi's statement. This is exactly what Ron Pandolfi, he wrote it. And that's what Dan Smith said, that Ron Pandolfi wrote it, sent it to WikiLeaks, and WikiLeaks put it up, which is pretty amazing that you're going to get some CIA guy who's basically feeding stuff to WikiLeaks, and WikiLeaks is playing the game and putting this on their thing to the world. And so you get the idea that this is a little more complex, that you should be watching what Ron Pandolfi's doing, and why is he putting this sort of thing out. And the significant thing about him, that people can say, okay, he's a crazy guy, you shouldn't listen to this guy or whatever, but he called this hoax minutes after that release. Right. On December the 16th, and I showed it in my one update, I immediately, so anything that happens, and the next release from Tom DeLonge, I'll do the same thing. I immediately go to Dan Smith and I say, okay, they just put this in the New York Times. They just released this video. They just, Tom DeLonge had this operation or whatever, this news conference. What does Ron say? And what I want the reaction from Ron. Well, how does Ron react to this sort of thing? And on December 16th, when I went to Dan Smith and said, Dan, they just released this thing, New York Times article and all this kind of stuff. What does Ron say? And he said, Ron said it's a hoax. And I'm thinking, well, how could it be a hoax? I mean, it looks pretty evident. They got this video, and the New York Times would bet this thing. And so he called this thing a hoax right from the word go. And the question is, did he call it too early? Did he actually say it too soon, where it actually indicates that he may have been the one that did the hoax? And that's where it comes to this interesting thing that I mentioned, was the fact that at one point, Dan actually posts, and this is maybe a week and a half ago, he actually posts, and he said, we've just the first disclosure thing has been fired off, and it's a shot heard around the world, and the gray lady who's the New York Times, has done this, and he indicates that he and Ron were behind this. So I said, are you saying that you and Ron were behind this New York Times thing and the video and all that kind of stuff? And he said, well, if nobody else takes credit for it, well, I guess we will. And that was always one of my theories. Long before that was the fact that if Ron Pandolfi is the head guy, if he is the key, he's the guy who holds the keys, he's the guy. It has to go through him. I don't care how many high-level people you got from Defense Department or whatever, you've got to go through the guy who has the keys. The guy who controls the classified material is Ron Pandolfi. And that's what I heard. And again, this goes back 2.5 years to the summer of 2015 when I first heard this, that Jim Semivan started the same year as Ron Pandolfi, 1983 in the CIA. He put his 25-year career. He had this experience with 3 beings in his room. He suddenly is outside in his pajamas, and he's watching this UFO fly away, and he goes back in. His wife is doubled over. He takes his wife to the hospital. He goes to talk to Tennant, the head of CIA, says, I've had this experience. And basically he's told, no, you don't need to know about this. It's going to destroy your career. And I am told in 2015, in the summer of 2015, that when Jim Semivan left the CIA, he got a briefing on UFOs. He was told, leave it alone. As soon as he quits, he gets the briefing and he gets told what to do. And he becomes like operational in this UFO disclosure effort that they're doing. And the briefing was done by Ronald Pandolfi. That's what I was told. So I always had the suspicion that Ron may be behind all of this stuff. And I bring up this example that when I've written about Ron, I've written about Dan Smith. Dan Smith got my book. He started calling everything Managing Magic. This is the book to read, all this sort of stuff. And so I knew Ron had read the book. And I knew they'd all seen the book. And nobody ever said anything. They've never, ever went after me for what I wrote or anything like that. The only time they ever confronted me, Dan Smith confronted me and tried to get me to stop talking, and that was when I first brought up Jim Semivan's name. And he said, no, this guy doesn't exist. I talked to Ron. This is, and Ron actually told him to take it off Open Minds Forum. The name had been posted on Open Minds Forum, and Ron said, quit posting stuff from loons and don't do it again or something like that. And Jim Semivan's name was taken off Open Minds Forum. So I kept going, and I said, no, this guy's for real. Dan Smith said, no, the guy's not for real. Ron says he doesn't exist. I said, he exists. Let me tell you, he exists. And then I said, okay, I'll give you a photograph. So I started sending him photographs, and then suddenly the thing, he actually said at one point, he said, I think you should stop talking about this. This is not real. You should quit talking to people about this Jim Semivan guy. And so then I sent him the photographs, and then suddenly the tune changed, which is their position today. Ron and Kevin and Dan Smith all still maintain that Jim Semivan is not who he says he is. That's not his name. He's a different guy, and all this kind of stuff. And the whole point is, that was the only time they tried to stop me from saying anything or from putting anything out, was when I brought up Jim Semivan. And the possible explanation is, that's their guy. He's the guy that's running the operation, and Ron is the puppet, and Jim Semivan is the puppet master, and he's running it. And that's why they didn't want me talking about Jim Semivan, because I had picked off their main guy. So when you start looking at this thing, and people will talk about, Ron saying this, or John Lear says this, and this is crazy. What you've got to realize is that everybody's going to say crazy things. Not everybody's going to have everything perfect. What you have to do is look at all the characters, and that is my position. I am looking at 79 characters, 79 people who I believe are part of this. And anytime any of those people say anything, I pay very close attention to try to figure out what's going on, because there's a lot of people in this thing. I'm saying 79 people. There's a lot. It's not just John Lear. It's not just Delonge. There's all sorts of high-level people who are playing in this game, and they're playing their cards out there slowly, and I will continue to watch all 79 players.